Hello and welcome to the Heliosblog. My name is Helios. Today we're going to talk about slavery and serfdom. People are under the impression in the modern world that slavery has been abolished. They believe that the past was an awful place where people exploited others and are extremely thankful we don't live in such backward times. They have no idea the insidiousness of their own situation. The truth is that the world never moved away from slavery or serfdom. It simply rebranded them. The truth is about to hurt. Massively.
Enjoying my content? Check out my blog at heliosblog.com. On YouTube, you can support me by liking and subscribing. I'm also on Spotify if you'd prefer a podcast. If you're interested in my books, The Strategist Guide to Seduction and Quotes to Live By, they're available on Amazon. In addition, you can follow me on Patreon at theheliosblog for exclusive content. On with the show.
Slavery. Here is the definition of slavery. It's a condition in which one human is owned by another. A slave was considered by law as property or chattel and was deprived of most of the rights ordinarily held by free persons. Basically, under slavery, certain people were not considered human and were exploited mercilessly, sometimes to the point of death. Slavery is a terrible thing. The textbooks say that slavery was abolished in the West in around 1865. It never truly was. Slavery simply changed form. Let's also talk a little bit about serfdom. This is the definition of serfdom. It's a form of agricultural servitude that most of Europe had left behind in the medieval period. Medieval serfs, aka villains, were unfree laborers who worked the area of a landowner or its tenant in return for physical and legal protection and the right to work a separate piece of land for their own basic needs. Emphasis on the was. Now, of course, serfdom didn't disappear. It also changed forms. Our current history textbooks talk about the terrible situation that both slaves and serfs experienced, making absolutely no mention of the current state of the world. This is done on purpose. We, the people, do not have access to the truth. Instead, we're fed pretty lies, bread, and circuses. Here is the real state of the modern world. Our modern world is one of slavery and serfdom. Nothing has changed practically for the average person in the last 1,000 years, other than modern medicine, which has increased the lifespan of the average slave and serf. The majority of the human population in the West still serves at the behest of their king, the corporate oligarch who rules them. The average person barely has a break and is forced to bow to the whims of their master. They're expendable and replaceable, living a life of quiet desperation. They make barely enough money to live. Something else has changed. In medieval times, the average person knew they were a slave or a serf. Today, the average person has no idea the true situation they find themselves in. Only an enlightened few have that privilege. Bread and circuses keep the average person occupied, while the world mercilessly exploits them. Modern slavery. A person that is forced to work in order to be able to live in a ratty apartment is a modern-day slave. People that live paycheck to paycheck have barely any more control over their life than a slave did in ancient times. Their whole lives are consumed by the acquisition of a paycheck. This paycheck is the absolute lowest possible quantity of money an individual can be paid to continue to be motivated to work while remaining a slave to the corporation they work for. These are the so-called lower class of our society. Some would also argue that prisoners are modern slaves, as they often work in sweatshop-like conditions in order to earn money, literally pennies on the dollar, so that they may buy shitty commissary items at a gigantic markup. In a way, many prisons follow the same system that slaves of the past followed. Look up indentured servitude. Modern serfdom. A person that works for a corporation, having only 2 weeks paid vacation a year, is a modern-day serf. They live slightly better than slaves, but not by much. The work that they have to do is also much more stressful as well. No matter how fulfilling such a job is, it is still forced work for 5 days of the week for 50 weeks of the year. The modern-day serf is what the politically correct would call a member of the middle class. The truth is that they really aren't part of a middle class at all. They have not much more freedom than a slave. What difference does it make whether you have a nice house and a nice car versus a shitty house and a shitty car if you lack time in both situations? One of these two options is just more comfortable slavery. The serfs serve at the behest of their oligarch just as the slaves do. They simply have nicer rooms. The brainwashing of the general population. The general population is under the impression that we live in some kind of free utopia, where all of the evils of the past have been resolved by modern ideas. This is patently false. The population is brainwashed from a young age to believe these ideas, as being a passive follower prevents any changes to the underlying power structure put in place by our rulers, corporations. The life of the average person matters not one iota to a corporatist oligarch, or any king throughout history, really. The only time any king considers the lives of the average person is when their position is personally affected. In modern times, this would refer to how much money they make or lose from the general population. It pays, therefore, or rather prevents the loss of money, to train the average person to be a good wage slave, follower, beta, or NPC. How is this done? You guessed it, public education. Corporations simply pay the school boards to brainwash children, or they pay the government, who pays the school boards. If you teach children from a young age to be obedient wage slave types, they'll never rise up to oppose your rule. The corporatist oligarchs can then rest easy, knowing that they'll always have a subset of the human population pre-brainwashed to make them money. This is the real reason why public education has fallen in quality over time. The less educated the populace is, the better corporations are at draining their potential in order to enrich themselves. Not only is public education failing in quality, institutions of higher learning are also failing in quality. Feminism has taken hold of many of these institutions, and the curriculum of many classes has changed to teach cultural Marxism rather than the things that are truly important, such as the scientific method or objective rational thought. It's more important for people to get good grades nowadays in institutions of higher learning than for people to actually learn what the world is really like and to draw conclusions for themselves. Expect the future to become plump with uneducated idiots, as even the average university student remains a blind idiot despite multiple years of education. Such is the result of learning information but failing to gain any wisdom. The truth will set you free and burn along the way. Now that you know the way the real world works, don't you think it's time you started to think for yourself? Don't just do what your parents, teachers, or society tells you is correct. They have other aims for you than your happiness. Both society and the matriarchy desire your slavery. Neither have your best interest at heart. To them, you're a useful tool. It's up to you whether you allow yourself to be put in such a position. You might want to consider learning how to decouple your earnings from your time. This will take years of practice and will likely distance you from all of your beta slave NPC friends. You can escape though. It simply comes at a cost, one most people are unwilling to pay. Conclusion. As you can see, not much has changed about the state of the world in 1,000 years. Sad, I know. Even though we're supposedly enlightened and all our problems have disappeared, we still live in a world of slavery, serfdom, and oligarchs. It's up to you to decide if you will be one of the slaves or a free man. The opening of your mind is the most important step to freeing yourself from your mental prison. Don't let the programming that has insidiously entered your brain since birth decide your fate. You are a thinking, reasoning man. Fight for your freedom. Take control of your life and stop sacrificing yourself for others' needs. Be wise, fierce, and independent.